I never thought much about running until Cassius moved into the apartment next door. That was 6 months ago, back in March, when the mornings were still cold enough that you could see your breath in the air. I'd been going through the motions of life, working my graphic design job from home, ordering too much takeout, existing more than living. Then one Saturday morning at 6 a.m, I heard someone in the hallway, and when I peeked through my door to grab the newspaper I still inexplicably subscribed to, there he was. Tall, with dark curly hair pulled back in a small bun, wearing running shorts despite the freezing temperature, stretching against the hallway wall like it was the most natural thing in the world. He looked up and smiled, and I remember thinking his smile was the kind that made you want to smile back, even if you were having the worst day of your life. "Morning," he said, his voice still rough with sleep. "I'm Cassius, just moved in." I introduced myself, probably said something awkward about the building's terrible water pressure, and watched him jog down the stairs with an ease I envied. I closed my door and realised I'd been holding my breath. After that, I started seeing him every morning. He'd always be heading out for a run right around 6, and I'd find reasons to be getting my newspaper or checking my mailbox at exactly that time. We'd exchange pleasantries, talk about the weather, complain about our landlord, normal neighbour stuff. Except I started thinking about those conversations throughout my day. I'd replay the way he laughed at my jokes, how he'd lean against the doorframe when we talked, completely relaxed and present in a way that made me feel like I was the only person in the world. One morning in April, after we'd been doing this dance for about a month, he stopped me as I was about to go back inside. "Hey, I know this is random, but do you run?" I laughed and gestured at myself in my pyjama pants and old college sweatshirt. "Do I look like I run?" He grinned, and there was something playful in his eyes. "You look like someone who could run. I see you out here every morning anyway. Might as well actually do something instead of pretending to care about a newspaper you never read." I felt my face get hot because he was completely right. I never read that newspaper. "That obvious?" I asked. He shrugged, still smiling. "I think it's nice. Makes my mornings better having someone to say hi to." And then, before I could process what that meant or didn't mean, he said, "Come running with me tomorrow. Just once. If you hate it, I'll never ask again." I should have said no. I should have made up an excuse about work or my knees or anything. But instead I heard myself say, "Okay, tomorrow." That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about running beside him, about what we'd talk about, whether I'd be able to keep up, whether this was just a friendly gesture or something more. I told myself I was being ridiculous. Straight guys asked other guys to work out together all the time. This didn't mean anything. Except I'd known I was gay since high school, and I'd learned to recognise that particular flutter in my chest that meant I was developing feelings for someone, and that flutter was currently doing Olympic-level gymnastics. The next morning I met him in the hallway at 6, wearing running shoes I'd bought years ago and never used. He looked genuinely happy to see me, which made everything worse and better at the same time. "Ready?" he asked. I nodded, even though I absolutely was not ready. We started slow, just jogging through our neighbourhood as the sun came up. He matched my pace without making me feel bad about how slow it was, pointing out houses he liked, telling me about his job as a physical therapist, asking about my design work. It felt easy, natural, like we'd been doing this for years instead of 20 minutes. When I finally had to stop, completely winded after maybe 2 miles, he didn't make fun of me. He just stopped too, handed me his water bottle and said, "That was great for your first time. You've got good form." I took a drink and tried not to think about the fact that we were sharing a water bottle, that his lips had just been where mine were. "Same time tomorrow?" he asked, and just like that, we became running partners. Over the next few weeks, running with Cassius became the best part of my day. We talk about everything during those morning runs. He told me about growing up in Georgia, about his complicated relationship with his family, about his ex-girlfriend who cheated on him 2 years ago, and how he'd moved to the city to start fresh. I told him about my parents, who still didn't quite understand what I did for work, about my college friends I'd lost touch with, about how lonely I'd been feeling lately even though I couldn't quite explain why. He listened in a way that made me feel heard, really heard, for the first time in years. I started noticing things about him, the way he'd push his hair back when he was thinking, how he'd touch my shoulder when he laughed at something I said, the fact that he always waited for me when I needed to slow down, never making me feel like I was holding him back. I noticed the small scar on his left knee and learned it was from a basketball injury in high school. I noticed that he was left-handed and that he always tied his right shoe first, I noticed everything, and I knew I was in trouble. By May, I'd accepted that I had feelings for him. Real, complicated, terrifying feelings. I'd lie in bed at night staring at the ceiling, knowing he was just on the other side of the wall, so close but completely out of reach. Because Cassius was straight. He'd mentioned his ex-girlfriend multiple times. He'd pointed out attractive women when we ran past the coffee shop downtown. He was just being a good friend, a good neighbour, and I was the one making it into something it wasn't. I thought about creating distance, maybe saying I was too busy to run anymore. But the truth was, even if it hurt, even if I was setting myself up for heartbreak, I couldn't give up those mornings with him. They'd become essential, like breathing, so I decided I'd just deal with it. I'd have these feelings quietly, privately, and I'd be grateful for his friendship because having him in my life, even just as a friend, was better than not having him at all. Then came that morning in early June. We'd been running together for 2 months and I'd gotten significantly better. We were doing 4 or 5 miles easily, sometimes more on weekends. That particular morning was already warm, promising a hot day ahead. We'd run our usual route through the park and we were on the path that loops around the lake, probably 3 miles in, when Cassius suddenly slowed down and stopped, his hand going to his left calf. "Cramp," he said, his face scrunched up in apparent pain. "Sorry, I need to sit for a minute." There was a bench about 20 feet away overlooking the water and we walked over to it. He sat down and started massaging his calf, and I sat next to him, close enough that our shoulders were almost touching. "This happen a lot?" I asked. He shook his head. "Not usually. Must have pushed too hard yesterday." We sat there in silence for a moment, watching the early morning light dance across the lake. There was a family of ducks swimming near the shore, and a few other runners passed by on the path. It was peaceful in a way that made my chest ache. "This is nice," Cassius said quietly. "Just sitting here. We should do this more often." I glanced at him and found him already looking at me, and there was something in his expression I couldn't quite read, something soft and uncertain. "The lake is pretty in the morning," I said, because I didn't know what else to say. He smiled, but it wasn't his usual easy grin. It was smaller, more vulnerable. "I wasn't talking about the lake," he said. My heart stopped, actually stopped. I stared at him, trying to understand what he was saying, what he meant, whether I was reading too much into 4 simple words. "Cassius," I started, but I didn't know how to finish the sentence. He looked away, back at the water, and I watched his throat move as he swallowed. "I need to tell you something," he said. "And I'm terrified to say it because I don't want to mess up what we have. These past 2 months, running with you every morning, talking to you, getting to know you, it's been the best part of moving here. The best part of my whole year, honestly." He paused, his hands gripping the edge of the bench. "But somewhere along the way, it became more than friendship for me. And I don't know if you feel the same way, and if you don't, that's completely okay. I'll never bring it up again. We can just keep being friends and pretend I never said anything." I couldn't breathe. I literally could not make my lungs work. "You have feelings for me," I managed to say. He finally looked at me again, and his eyes were so earnest, so open, that I felt like I might break apart. "Yeah," he said. "I really do. I think I have for a while now." He laughed nervously. "That ex-girlfriend I mentioned. There's a reason it didn't work out. There's a reason none of my relationships with women ever worked out. I've been figuring myself out over the past few years, and being around you, it made everything clear." I realized I was shaking. "You're Cramp," I said stupidly. "I feel." And I thought if we were sitting, I feel. And I thought if we were sitting here looking at the lake, maybe it would be easier. He ran a hand through his hair. "Turns out it's terrifying no matter what." "I have feelings for you too," I blurted out. "I've had feelings for you since basically the first week we started running. I thought I was going crazy. I thought I was making everything up in my head because I wanted it to be real so badly." The relief on his face was so profound it made my eyes sting. "Really?" he asked. "Really?" I confirmed. "I've been trying so hard not to show it because I thought you were straight, and I didn't want to make things weird or lose you as a friend." He laughed, and it was his real laugh, the one that made his whole face light up. "I've been doing the exact same thing. All those times I mentioned my ex or pointed out other people, I was trying to seem normal, trying to hide what I was feeling. But I couldn't stop thinking about you. Every morning I'd wake up excited because I knew I'd get to see you. Every night I'd lie in bed knowing you were right next door and wish I had the courage to knock on your door and just tell you. We sat there looking at each other, and I felt like the world had shifted on its axis. Everything looked the same, the lake and the ducks and the path and the bench, but everything was completely different because Cassius had feelings for me. Cassius, who I'd been quietly falling for over the past 2 months, felt the same way. "So what now?" I asked. He smiled, and this time it was his full, brilliant smile. "Well, I'd really like to kiss you if that's okay," my breath caught. "Here? Now?" I looked around at the park, at the other runners and dog walkers. He must have seen my hesitation because he said, "Or we could go back to one of our apartments, take an actual shower, have breakfast together, talk about this properly." He reached over and took my hand, lacing our fingers together, and the simple touch sent electricity through my entire body. "I want to do this right," he said. "I want to take you on an actual date. I want to know everything about you. I want to see where this goes." I squeezed his hand. "I want that too. All of that." We sat there for another moment, holding hands on a bench by the lake as the sun rose higher and the day grew warmer around us. Then he stood up, pulling me with him. "Come on," he said. "Let's go home." We walked back instead of running, still holding hands, not caring who saw us. We talked the whole way, but it was different now. There was no more hiding, no more carefully chosen words to avoid revealing too much. He told me about the first moment he realized he was attracted to me, which apparently was the second week of running together when I'd made some sarcastic comment about a pretentious coffee shop, and he'd laughed so hard he had to stop running. I told him about lying in bed at night, hearing him move around in his apartment, feeling like he was so close, but impossibly far away. He squeezed my hand tighter. "I did the same thing," he admitted. "I'd hear you typing on your keyboard or watching TV, and I'd wonder what you were working on, what you were watching, whether you ever thought about me the way I thought about you." When we got back to our building, we stood in the hallway between our 2 doors, neither of us wanting the moment to end. "Breakfast?" he asked. "My place? I make really good omelettes." I grinned. "You're going to cook for me?" He stepped closer, and suddenly we were inches apart and I could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. "I'm going to do a lot of things for you," he said softly, "if you'll let me." I reached up and touched his face, my fingers tracing his jawline, and he leaned into the touch like he'd been waiting for it. "I'm going to hold you to that," I said. He smiled, and then, finally, he kissed me. It was soft and sweet and perfect, his hand coming up to cup the back of my neck, and I felt like every nerve ending in my body was on fire. When we pulled apart, we were both breathing hard, and he rested his forehead against mine. "I've wanted to do that for so long," he whispered. "Me too," I whispered back. We ended up at his apartment, and he did make omelettes, though we kept getting distracted and kissing in between chopping vegetables and whisking eggs. We talked about everything, about what we wanted, about our fears, about how to navigate this new thing between us. He told me he'd been out to his close friends for about a year, but not to his family yet. I told him about my own coming out experience in college, about the friends who'd supported me and the ones who hadn't. We talked about taking things slow, about not rushing, about making sure we built something real and lasting. But we also talked about how hard it would be to take things slow when we lived right next door to each other and had already spent the past 2 months falling for each other. "We'll figure it out," he said, reaching across his small kitchen table to take my hand again. "As long as we're honest with each other, we'll figure it out." That was 3 weeks ago. We still run together every morning, but now we hold hands when we walk back. Now we kiss goodbye before we go into our separate apartments, though honestly, we spend most of our time in one apartment or the other. Last weekend he took me to a nice restaurant downtown for our official first date, and afterward we walked along the waterfront and he told me he was falling in love with me. I told him I was falling in love with him too, and it felt like the most natural thing in the world to say. My life looks different now. I wake up excited every morning, not just because I get to run with Cassius, but because I get to be with him, to talk to him, to build something real with someone who sees me and chooses me every single day. We're planning to tell his family soon, and he's nervous but ready. We're talking about maybe getting a bigger place together eventually, though we both laugh because we basically already live together, even with 2 separate apartments. Sometimes I think about that morning by the lake, about his fake cramp and his nervous confession. I think about how scared we both were, how much courage it took for him to be honest about his feelings. And I'm so grateful he found that courage because my life is infinitely better with him in it. Not just as my running partner, but as my person. The one who makes me laugh every day, who listens when I need to talk, who looks at me like I'm the best thing that ever happened to him. Last night we were lying on his couch, watching some movie neither of us were paying attention to, and he said, "You know what's funny? I almost didn't fake that cramp. I almost chickened out and just kept running." I propped myself up on my elbow to look at him. "What made you go through with it?" He smiled and tucked a strand of hair behind my ear. I realized that the worst thing that could happen if I told you wasn't that you'd reject me. The worst thing would be spending the rest of my life wondering what if. Wondering if maybe you felt the same way and I was just too scared to find out. I kissed him then, slow and deep, trying to pour everything I felt into it. When we broke apart, I said, "I'm really glad you faked that cramp." He laughed and pulled me closer. "Me too. Best decision I ever made." And lying there in his arms, I couldn't help but agree. Sometimes the scariest thing to do is tell someone how you really feel. But sometimes, if you're really lucky, they feel exactly the same way. And that makes all the fear, all the uncertainty, all the risk completely worth it.